quoi être inquiets, puisqu'ils sont partis à remonter, à établir une espèce de chronologie de la colonisation et en remontant dès le début. Donc pour le moment, ils travaillent sur le 19e siècle. Donc je ne sais pas combien de temps ils vont mettre pour élaborer cette chronologie commune de la colonisation avant d'aborder la période contemporaine et notamment la question des essais qui fait partie de leur feuille de route et qui pourrait permettre à partir de là de déboucher sur des actions concrètes. Parce que des actions concrètes qui peuvent être faites, il y en a beaucoup qui peuvent être faites, qui ont été déjà revendiquées par les différentes associations. La première, c'est le nettoyage des sites, puisque sur le site d'Inneker, il y a eu un accident le 1er mai 1962, et de la lave a découlé, elle s'est écoulée de la montagne, et cette lave-là est fortement radioactive, aujourd'hui encore. Elle aurait dû être ramassée par le gouvernement français et traitée comme déchets nucléaires, ramenée en France et traitée dans les sites de déchets nucléaires, ce qui n'a pas été fait. Pareil pour les déchets au moment du départ. La France, quand elle est partie d'Algérie, elle a creusé des trous et enterré du matériel, à la fois radioactif, non radioactif, avec toute la difficulté, bien évidemment, comme il n'y a eu aucune information des populations faite à ce moment-là, que tous ces déchets, ça allait des véhicules, des moteurs, des quantités de cuivre, de fils électriques. Les populations les ont récupérés pour les utiliser, pour les revendre et ont dispersé ainsi de la radioactivité. On a incorporé elles-mêmes pour elles-mêmes et on a bien sûr dispersé. Là aussi, la France, pour le moment, refuse ou n'a toujours pas donné la liste du matériel qui avait été enfui, les lieux où ça avait été enfui. Et là encore, il y aura un travail à faire conjointement des deux gouvernements pour vérifier ce qui reste dans ces puits, dans ces lieux de déchets, les récupérer, les transformer en déchets, les ramener pour la France, effectivement en France, pour les traiter comme déchets. Ça fait partie de toutes ces conséquences des essais au niveau environnemental et au niveau sanitaire. Là encore, aussi, il y aurait des choses que la France peut faire déjà en transférant en Algérie tous les dossiers concernant les essais nucléaires, puisque pour chaque essai, il y avait des rapports qui étaient faits, des mesures de la radioactivité qui étaient faites, et donc de façon à pouvoir que le peuple algérien puisse s'en emparer, et que surtout le corps médical aussi puisse s'en emparer, et que soit mis en place un suivi médical au niveau des personnes affectées. Voilà, je crois que j'ai largement dépassé le temps qui m'était imparti, donc je vais m'en arrêter là et je serai à disposition
C'est pas
pour
grave.
les questions.
Si, vous pouvez continuer si vous souhaitez.
Non, mais parce que oui, je reprendrai après au niveau des questions.
D'accord, ok. Merci beaucoup pour cette intervention pertinente. Je passerai à Monsieur Jean-Marie Collin. Vous allez parler aujourd'hui des articles in English. So, how do Article 6 and 7 of the TPNW address the needs of victims of nuclear testing and the environment? And what steps are necessary to ensure these obligations are fully realized by the signatory states, according to you? Can you unmute your microphone? You're muted. Oh,
Okay, now it should work. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you a lot for this invitation, Shoad and Iman and Rashid. If today it's an important commemoration date for Algeria, it's a date that it's completely ignored in France, and so it's important to for this seminar to promote this day and that people are more aware about the consequences of the French nuclear test. And so you asked me to speak about the TPNW and Article 6 and 7. So at first glance, nuclear testing may seem as an obsolete practice of a foregone era, an aberration we left behind in the past centuries. But when we look back, we quickly realize that we are bound with this radiological legacy. We are bound by the fact that 17 French nuclear tests in Algeria provoked humanitarian and environmental consequences, as the 193 in Polynesia, Maui Nui, and more globally has the 2000 realized around the world by other nuclear states. We are bound by the fact that if today we are in a world where nuclear states threat all the time the rest of the world, it's because decades ago they tested nuclear weapons in remote areas where indigenous people lived. The effects of these weapons are still there, as we heard, as Patrice just described, and it's to deal with them that the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and its Article 6 names victim assistance and environmental remediations, and 7 name international cooperation and assistance have been put in place. And so I'm going to speak about that. First, I'm going to remember a little bit about what is the TPNW, because it's really necessary and it's also a great treaty, so it's important to mention it. So the 7th of July 2017, the United Nations Conference on Negotiating a Legally Binding Instrument to Prohibit Nuclear Weapons is adopted with a large majority of 122 states. And it's important to remember that these negotiations round were completely boycotted by all nuclear weapons possessing states, NATO countries, except Netherlands, and many military allies of nuclear weapon states. Since then, the TPNW entered into force on 22 January 2021, and there are currently 93 signatories and 70 state parties. Sao Tome and Principe is the last state this year, the 15th of January, who became a party. If Algeria was one of the first signatories at the high-level ceremony for signatures on September 2017, we are still waiting for the ratifications. Algerian decisions to become a signatory in 2017 was informed by its own experience, and I quote, of the dire consequences, both environmental and humanitarian, of French nuclear tests. In 2020, Algeria expressed again its intention to ratify the TPNW, and I quote again, in the very short coming time. And in a closing statement to the NPT Review Conference in 2022, Algeria and 64 other TPNW supporters urge all states committed to attain and maintain a world without nuclear weapons to join the TPNW without delay. So the TPNW has its origin in the Humanitarian Initiative, which was 3 conferences focusing on the severe humanitarian consequences of nuclear detonations. And by the way, tomorrow it's an important date for our movement too, because it's the 14th of February, and we're going to celebrate the second humanitarian conference 10 years ago, also known under the name at the Nayalit Conference. And this conference, the Nayalit one, definitively launched the idea of the necessity for a ban treaty. And before to enter the detail again on the 6/7, it's important to remember that the TPNW is based on international humanitarian law and human rights. The preamble presents the objective of the TPNW in a humanitarian framework, the ultimate goal being to completely eliminate such nuclear weapons, further stating that a legally binding ban of nuclear weapons constitute an important contribution towards the achievement and maintenance of a world free of nuclear weapons, including the irreversible, verifiable, and transparent eliminations of nuclear weapons, and determined to act towards that end. It's important again to be aware that for the first time, the term future generations, paragraph 4, was used in a treaty prohibiting a weapon of mass destruction. And it should also be noted that by introducing in this paragraph the notion of gender, which for us as victim people, it's really important. And the most significant effect of nuclear weapons on women and girls, the wish to preserve their health and their capacity to give life to new generation, is obviously implied. There is 20 articles in this treaty, and it's always good to read the first one, prohibitions, has expressively prohibit the use of nuclear weapons, as well as any activities that make their use possible. So each state undertakes never under any circumstances to develop, test, produce, manufacture, otherwise acquire, possess or stockpiles, transfer, receive, allow any stationing, installation or deployment of any nuclear weapons. So not just the TPNW demand the implementation of a nuclear disarmament process in Article 4, they all with verifications, but they also act for the rehabilitations following past actions. And that's why the TPNW is a humanitarian disarmament treaty, as it includes positive obligations, which are again direct result of the conclusions of the Conference on Humanitarian Impact of Nuclear Weapons. So the Article 6, victim assistance and environmental remediations, require that each state party shall, with respect to individuals under its jurisdictions who are affected by the use or testing of nuclear weapons in accordance with applicable international humanitarian and human rights law, adequately provide age and gender-sensitive assistance without discriminations, including medical care, rehabilitations, and psychological support, as well as provide for their social and economic inclusions. It was already clear in 2017, and we can see that reflecting at the last two meetings of state parties in 2022 and 2023, that the definition of what is a victim is therefore very broad, including both issues of physical health, like illness caused by radiation, and psychological, like for women who have become infertile or suffer a miscarriage, and economic problem, like, for example, water may have been polluted and be unfit for farming. So as Patrice described just before me, we are very far of a definition of what is a victim if I read the French definitions, as these French definitions only base about if you have one of the 23 recognized radiations-induced disease. The Article 7, so names international cooperation and assistance, grants the right to state parties to seek and receive assistance from other state parties to the treaty, and all state parties who are in a position to do so have a duty to provide assistance to the others in meeting their positive obligations. The assistance can be financial and technical and may take the form of rehabilitation of the environment or help the people who are located. We have to note that these two sections use the term in a position to do so, with the aim of encouraging state parties to implement such measure. However, it also means providing an opportunity for this process to get started promptly. And assistance may also be provided by various organizations, including the UN, the International Committee of the Red Cross, or the Red Crescent. If we look at about that on the Algerian view, the Algerian diplomats during the negotiations have taken very strong positions, which are now fully reflected on Article 6 and 7. I quote the Algerian diplomat's names Abdel Karim Aid Abdeslam in March 2017. He said, "My delegation would like to see that the treaty should also contain robust measures regarding the recognition of the rights and the need of victims and survivors of the use and testing of nuclear weapons, including with regard to transgenerational health effect, and a commitment to provide assistance to those victims and to environmental remediations." And if also the TPNW recognize the principle of the polluter pays, in the paragraph 6 of the Article 7, it's also because Algeria insisted, and I read, a state party that has used or tested nuclear weapons shall have responsibility to provide adequate assistance to affected state parties for the purpose of victim assistance and environmental remediations. So in this treaty, it's really the first time that an accusing fingers has been pointing at nuclear state in a treaty on nuclear weapons, and that secondly, the international community has required them to make reparations for their actions. So obviously, as we know, and as I mentioned, Algeria for the moment is not party of the treaty, but there is no doubt about the future Algerian ratifications. And this ratification will be fully positive, not only for the country, but obviously for the people and more for the global world, because it will be enabling Algeria to ask, for example, request technical support for example, analyze, remove, and help to store nuclear waste. Patrice mentioned it, but so with Patrice, we published a study 4 years ago, radioactivity under the sun, who showed the amount of waste that are still there. Algeria, after the ratification, could also request international assistance, in particular from the Red Crescent Society and also the National Red Crescent Society, as they already move and act, for example, by asking the French Red Cross to work on this topic. The Red Crescent, for example, is based in Algeria and can be, for example, be on the ground and record the witness statement and produce an initial health assessment fairly swiftly. And they will be also able to request funding, because it should be noted that at the second meeting of State Party, so last year in December, it was decided to regard the feasibility of possible guidelines for establishing an international trust fund for victim assistance and environmental remediation, in the objective to adopt and establish these international trust funds. A report is going to be submitted for the third meeting of state parties in March 2025. So it's really the year, this year is really important, and it should be the year where Algeria will ratify the treaty. And despite the fact that Algeria is not, again, for the member of the TPNW, it should be noted that in May 2021, this country created a national agency for the rehabilitation of former French nuclear test and explosion site in southern Algeria. So it was the first time that an Algerian authority of this kind has been set up and is expected to work publicly. The agency missions will be to implement programs to rehabilitate former test sites, monitor the work, and at the end, hand over these former test sites to the local community. So it's really a big step for Algeria. And we can expect it that this important step is on the direction of ratifying the TPNW. And maybe it's the last steps, as we can read the Article 6 and the paragraph 3. It's written, each state party, with respect to her area under its jurisdictions, as a result of activity related to the testing of nuclear weapons, shall take necessary and appropriate measure. So appropriate measure is, for example, the creation of this agency toward the environmental remediations of areas so contaminated. So even if Algeria, for the moment, it's not part, they already act. Even if France and Algeria are on opposite sides in this regard, one is a nuclear weapon, the other one is a non-nuclear weapon state. Both have opposing view regarding the TPNW. We can be sure that at the moment Algeria will done its ratifications process, France will be, by obligation of that, a little bit on board of this process. So that's the last reason why it's important for us that Algeria ratify. And I thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to answer to your question in French or in English. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Jean-Marie. Can you hear me?
Yes, now yes.
Yes. So as I was saying, thank you for this insightful reading into the articles, and we'll open for questions later. I see the UN Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights has joined us, Mr. Orellana. So he's going to speak. Let's welcome him again. You have the floor, Dr. Orellana. I'm sorry, I seem to be cutting. So, Mr. Orellana, can you hear me? Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Dr.
Hello?
Mara,
Hi, can you hear me? Hello?
Dr. Marox, can you hear me?
I apologize for the technical issue. So, as I was saying, Dr. Marcus Orlina, the UN Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights, has joined us today to talk to us about his mandate in general. So, Dr. Marcus, you have the floor. I think we need to unmute him. Okay.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. I received a window that the host has unmuted me. and,
Yes.
and now it says I cannot start my video because the host has stopped it. So if the host could start my video, I'll be happy to.
The host, can you start this video, please?
Or at least unblock it.
So we had Mr. Patrice Bouveret speak and then Mr. Jean-Marie. So you were supposed to start first, but it's okay. Now the floor is yours. Let me try and see if I can do it. Yes, sir.
Not yet, no.
Yes, sir. Can you please? I am sorry for the inconvenience. Yes, sir. Can you please allow the UNSR to share his screen, his video?
Line now, please.
Not share screen, yes, just the video. Allow the UNSR.
Okay, there we go.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, and apologies for the delay. I'm very pleased to have the chance to be with you this morning for this important conversation. My name is Marcos Orellana. I'm the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights. This is a mandate of a special procedure of the United Nations Human Rights Council that is tasked with monitoring and reporting human rights infringements, violations, and abuses that people suffer as a result of exposure to hazardous substances and wastes. It was created back in 1995 by the then Commission on Human Rights at the behest of the African group at the United Nations because of the growing concern that the global north, the industrialized north, was using the global south as its dumping ground for hazardous wastes. This practice was denounced as an expression of environmental racism and environmental injustice. This transfer of waste from the north to south is at the heart of this mandate, but it was then expanded to look not just at transboundary transfers of hazardous wastes, but at the whole life cycle of chemicals and wastes. And so it is a global mandate with a global reach that looks at issues of global environmental injustice, because exposure to hazardous substances, including toxics, including radioactive substances and contamination, can have a range of impacts on the enjoyment of human rights. Just to mention a couple: the right to life, the right to health, the right to a healthy environment, but also the right to housing, food, water and sanitation, cultural rights, the right to property. All of these rights can be heavily compromised as a result of people being exposed to hazardous substances and waste. And I'll elaborate a little bit with the specific examples on this. The mandate on toxics and human rights of the Human Rights Council is a monitoring and reporting mandate. And so it observes and receives information on what is going on around the world in respect of toxics, and it reports to the UN General Assembly, to the UN Human Rights Council. It uses various tools to carry out this task. And among those tools are letters, for example, allegation letters, other letters. You may have seen perhaps letters that I've sent to the government of Japan in respect of the concerns around contaminated release into the Pacific Ocean of waters that may be contaminated with nuclear and radioactive pollution. The elaboration of thematic reports is another tool that the mandate uses. And then there's also the possibility of undertaking country visits, official country visits, 2 per year, and by invitation of the government of the country in question. And this is where I want to dwell a little bit and spend some time speaking about some of the findings and some of the testimonies that I've received and my predecessors in the mandate have received. I should say I was appointed to the mandate in August of 2020, and so there's a long history of mandate holders carrying this work before me. My appointment was renewed in July of last year, and I'll be in this position until July of 2026. So the first country visit that I wish to discuss, even if briefly, is my predecessor went to Kazakhstan on official country visit in 2015. And he found, and I quote the report that he produced and presented to the Human Rights Council, that radioactive waste may be the greatest challenge for Kazakhstan. Including waste from ongoing production and waste disposed improperly during the Soviet era, as well as a legacy of nuclear testing in Semipalatinsk, where almost 500 nuclear weapons tests were carried out, end of quote. I wanted to highlight this because it already gives expression of the legacy. The speaker before me, Jean-Marie Colin, spoke about how in the minds of many, nuclear testing is something of the past. And hopefully that will be the case, but the legacy of nuclear tests lives on. The radioactive contamination of the land and of the people and of the survivors and of the descendants of the people that were exposed. Also the memory of the people lives on. And this issue became quite stark in my country visit to Australia. I had the opportunity to conduct an official country visit to Australia last year, 2023, where Indigenous peoples experienced nuclear weapons testing in their territories during the 1950s and 1960s. Detonations in the Emu field in Maralinga carried out this is all in the state of South Australia, in Australia. They were carried out by the British government, and to this date, these detonations reverberate in the memory of the Aboriginal community. A couple points to highlight. For many years, the government failed to disclose information about these tests. There were testimonies that military personnel were used as guinea pigs to measure the impacts on their bodies of the radiation. So this is, of course, extremely serious. During my visit, I also heard testimonies of indigenous persons speaking of their lived experience, the lived experience of their people. They told me that their people did not receive advance notice of the detonations, that the black mist, as they call this cloud of heavy smoke, they stung their eyes, and many lost their eyesight. Many of the elders died from the radiation exposure, and many others fell ill with cancer and other terminal diseases. At the end of my mission to Australia, I released an end of mission statement. I will release a full-bodied report to the Human Rights Council in September of this year. But in my end of mission statement, I make the point that an apology can open a path towards healing for the loss of family members who passed away in the aftermath of the testing. Another country visit that I thought I would also speak about was carried by one of my predecessors back in 2012 to the Republic of the Marshall Islands. And I want to devote some time to this because the Republic of the Marshall Islands, at the time these detonations were carried out, was under UN trusteeship. And so there's big questions about United Nations responsibilities in this regard. Of course, there are responsibilities of the country that was responsible for the trusteeship. So that's the United States, and I'll come back to that. So a couple words of background here on the Republic of the Marshall Islands. These comprise 29 low-lying coral atolls and 5 islands, totaling 70 square miles of land, scattered over 750,000 square miles of ocean. So I mention this because it gives you an idea of the importance of the seas in relation to the land, and also the importance of the land for the people that inhabit the Marshall Islands. In 1947, the Marshall Islands was designated a trust territory pursuant to a Security Council resolution, and the United States of America was designated as the administering authority. The United States conducted nuclear testing involving 67 detonations in the Marshall Islands from 1946 to 1958. In 1986, the so-called Compact of Free Association between the United States and the Republic of the Marshall Islands entered into force, establishing the Republic of the Marshall Islands as a sovereign state. And I want to point out that under Section 177 of this compact, the government of the United States, and I quote, accepts the responsibility for compensation owing to citizens of the Marshall Islands for loss or damage to property and person of the citizens of the Marshall Islands resulting from the nuclear testing program which the government of the United States conducted in the Northern Marshall Islands between June 30, 1946 and August 18, 1958. End of quote. I thought of quoting this section because it speaks to responsibility for loss and damage. It speaks to compensation. It speaks to the impacts of nuclear testing program. At times when we speak about nuclear weapons, focus is on the victims of their use, and certainly that is a very important dimension of this problem. But it's not just use, it's also testing, and that's where the legacy of testing and the damage caused to people and the environment come to sharp relief. some elements of the legacy of nuclear testing that were identified by my predecessor in his report, his country visit report. This is a public document. It's available on the website of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. He identifies several elements of distrust in the relationship between the Republic of the Marshall Islands and the United States. Certainly the impairment of the rights to life and health, fatalities, the people that have died, health complications, skin burns, hair loss, finger discoloration, nausea, cancers, growth retardation in children. The speaker before me also highlighted the element of gender in the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. My predecessor speaks of gendered impacts because women process foods and weave fibers, and it happens that those foods and fibers contain higher elements of radiation, and so exposure of women more than men, leading to reproductive problems, stillbirths, congenital birth defects, miscarriages. This is, of course, all very serious in terms of reproductive rights. Access to information is another element that I wish to highlight, because for many years, for decades, the inhabitants of the Marshall Islands were denied access to medical records. Access to information, and I'll come back to this, is a critical element of the right to a clean and healthy environment. Displacement as a legacy of nuclear testing. This compromises issues and rights and principles like self-determination, the right to food, or cultural rights. There's also the question of the right to an effective remedy. In the compact that I cited earlier, there was the provisions for the creation of a nuclear claims fund and a nuclear claims tribunal that would hear claims and allocate funding. Funding was established at the level of $150 million for such claims. These resources have proved to be insufficient, and a petition by the Marshallese Islanders to the US Congress for additional funding. This petition was lodged in the year 2000. It remains pending. And the last element of the legacy of nuclear weapons testing that I wish to highlight here is the near irreversible contamination. There have been reports by the International Agency, the International Atomic Energy Agency, that certain atolls should not be resettled because of the levels of contamination. So given all of this, given all of these impacts, given this history, given this background, the Republic of the Marshall Islands seized the Human Rights Council with an initiative towards a resolution on technical assistance and capacity building to address the human rights implications of the nuclear legacy in the Marshall Islands. And the Human Rights Council adopted such resolution in October 22, Resolution 51/35. I wish to highlight a couple of points of this resolution because I think they're relevant not only to the Marshall Islands, certainly they are relevant to the Marshall Islands, but they're broadly relevant to many of the countries and the peoples that have experienced the legacy of nuclear weapons testing. In the preamble, number of preambular paragraphs, I wish to highlight two. One that recognizes that the Marshall Islands, as a small island developing state, does not have the technical capacity or resources to remove from its territory the toxic wastes from the nuclear tests. The other preambular paragraph I wish to highlight is the one that recognizes that the government of the Marshall Islands does not have the technical capacity or resources to build or provide healthcare facilities with medical equipment used for the detection, prevention, or treatment of cancers and other non-communicable diseases stemming from exposure to nuclear radiation and contamination. There's so much more that could be said in the preambular paragraphs, but for the sake of time, I wish to highlight two operative paragraphs. One, paragraph 11, that requests the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to cooperate with the government of the Marshall Islands in the field of human rights and provide technical assistance and capacity building to the Nuclear Commission of the Marshall Islands in advancing its strategy, and this is the part I wish to highlight, a strategy for nuclear justice and the needs to pursue transitional justice in its efforts to address the nuclear legacy. So what does that mean? Nuclear justice, transitional justice in the regards to the legacy of nuclear weapons testing. It seems to me that the experience of the Marshall Islands is also relevant to other countries that have experienced the scourge of nuclear weapons testing. And the last operative paragraph that I wish to highlight is the request to the Office of the High Commissioner to prepare a report on addressing the challenges and barriers to the full realization and enjoyment of the human rights of the people of the Marshall Islands stemming from the state's nuclear legacy. So this will be an opportunity for enhanced interactive dialogue. And so there's that international cooperation in action, lessons learned, and lessons that can be applied elsewhere as well. I'm cognizant of time, so I wish to offer a few concluding remarks. The first point I wish to highlight here is the growing awareness in humanity, in the international community, on the catastrophic consequences of the use and testing of nuclear weapons for the enjoyment of fundamental human rights, the rights to life, the right to health, the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. A second remark is on the critical importance of elements of transitional justice and the rights of victims in addressing the legacy of nuclear weapons testing. Elements such as preserving the memory of injustices, such as educating future generations. A third point was elaborated in detail by Jean-Marie Colline, so I will only point out that the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons from 2017 stands as a key instrument in dealing with this legacy. The preamble expresses that it is mindful of the unacceptable suffering and harm caused to those affected by the testing of nuclear weapons. Article 6 speaks of victim assistance and environmental remediation. It speaks of gender-sensitive assistance to victims of nuclear weapons testing. It speaks to environmental remediation of areas contaminated by nuclear weapons testing. And Article 7 speaks to international cooperation and assistance, each state party in a position to do so, which is language also used in the climate change space and the Framework Convention on Climate Change. Each state party in a position to do so shall provide technical, material, and financial assistance to states parties affected by nuclear weapons use or testing. And each state party in a position to do so shall provide assistance for the victims of the use or testing of nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices. And the last point I wish to highlight is on the global recognition of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment by the UN General Assembly in 2022. This is Resolution 76/300. There's still much debate on content, whether it's progressive realization, such as in the area of economic, social, and cultural rights, or whether it's immediate and justiciable content, such as in the area of civil and political rights. That debate goes on, but what is clear is that there's consensus that information and access to information on environmental risks is a key element of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Every person, everyone has the right to know about hazardous wastes that may have impact on their lives and health. And the victims of human rights violations due to environmental degradation, including as a result of the legacy of nuclear weapons testing, have the right to access effective remedies. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for the invitation to join this program. I'd be happy to take any comments or questions at the opportune time.
Thank you, Dr. Marcus, for this very detailed and informative insight and intervention you just did. We'll take questions a bit later. So we have now next Dr. Emel Mejri, who is a doctor who has a PhD in nuclear disarmament and an advocate for nuclear disarmament too. And she's going to talk about the radio conditions in the sites of Tesson in Algeria. Emel, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Iman. Thank you, everyone. I was thrilled to hear the previous interventions. My presentation will be in French, so I'm going to switch to French. Je tiens tout d'abord à remercier, à exprimer ma profonde reconnaissance, gratitude envers Iman pour son aimable invitation à prendre la parole sur un sujet qui me tient particulièrement à cœur, qu'est les essais nucléaires, et particulièrement les essais nucléaires français en Algérie. Je souhaite également adresser mes sincères félicitations à Shoah pour le choix judicieux de la thématique abordée. Je saisis cette occasion pour exhorter à une intensification des efforts concernant la question des essais nucléaires français en Algérie et à rendre justice aux victimes qui en ont souffert. Nous n'avons pas encore entendu parler M. Mohamed Mahmoud, mais je tiens à le saluer et saluer le fait qu'il a eu pour son courage et je pense que sa voix ne devrait pas être demeurée isolée et il est impératif de créer un collectif et un réseau permettant aux victimes algériennes de se faire entendre, d'accuser et de réclamer justice et réparation, bien évidemment. En fait, aussi, c'était avec une grande satisfaction que je partage ce panel avec Jean-Marie Collin et Patrice Bouvray, qui ont été les premiers à m'initier à cette thématique si captivante qu'est le désarmement nucléaire. Je saisis également cette occasion pour exprimer ma reconnaissance indéfectible envers Jean-Marie pour ses efforts inlassables visant à créer des opportunités pour la jeunesse africaine et particulièrement algérienne. En fait, en préparant mon intervention aujourd'hui, je lisais le rapport du groupe consultatif scientifique sur le statut et les évolutions concernant les armes nucléaires, les risques liés aux armes nucléaires, les conséquences humanitaires des armes nucléaires, le désarmement et les questions connexes rendues à l'Assemblée des États membres du traité sur l'interdiction des armes nucléaires, le TION, en octobre 2023. Le rapport met en lumière un déficit en matière de reconstruction systématique et exhaustive de l'impact des essais nucléaires sur les communautés et les individus, tant au niveau local que régional, tel qu'observé dans les rapports de plusieurs organismes internationaux, notamment le Comité des Nations Unies sur les effets des radiations atomiques. Le rapport souligne les résultats d'études menées auprès des populations résidant en aval des sites d'essai, mettant en évidence des preuves de risques accrus de certains cancers et de troubles de santé mentale associés à la résidence dans des zones contaminées ou à proximité de celles-ci. De plus, il souligne le potentiel des recherches en épigénétique, un domaine en constante évolution, à enrichir considérablement notre compréhension des conséquences sanitaires et environnementales de l'exposition aux radiations nucléaires, allant au-delà des mutations génétiques pour inclure des effets, ce qu'on appelle transgénérationnels, qui se transmettent de génération à une autre. Le rapport aussi souligne que de nouvelles études portant sur les capacités et les meilleures pratiques pour fournir une assistance aux victimes des essais nucléaires, incluant les soins médicaux, la réadaptation et le soutien psychologique, peuvent compléter les recherches et les effets humanitaires des essais. Le groupe scientifique recommande également la poursuite de recherches supplémentaires visant à approfondir la compréhension des impacts différenciés et disproportionnés des essais nucléaires en fonction de l'âge, du genre, à la fois au niveau individuel, mais aussi dans les processus sociaux. Ces efforts contribueront, selon le rapport, et je cite, à renforcer le soutien aux victimes de manière non discriminatoire. Fin de la citation. En fait, il est surprenant, en lisant ce rapport, j'étais vraiment frappée par la contradiction entre les conclusions de ce rapport, qui est très récent, octobre 2023, et les conclusions de tout un autre rapport intitulé Conditions radiologiques sur les anciens sites d'essais nucléaires français en Algérie, évaluation radiologique, préliminaire et recommandations. En fait, ce rapport date de 2005. Et suite, en fait, à la demande du gouvernement algérien, une demande adressée à l'Agence internationale de l'énergie atomique, la IEA, à la fin des années 99, il y a eu une mission d'enquête et une mission scientifique en Algérie autour des essais nucléaires qui ont lieu dans le Sahara algérien. Et l'objectif de la mission était les suivants. Effectuer une évaluation préliminaire de la situation radiologique des sites d'essais de Regan, où il y avait les essais atmosphériques, et de Ain Eker, où il y avait le site d'essais, c'est le site des essais nucléaires souterrains et le site des déchets radioactifs. Le deuxième objectif de la mission était de collecter et analyser des échantillons environnementaux et alimentaires. Et le troisième objectif était d'utiliser les résultats de ces mesures pour élaborer un plan de surveillance plus complet des sites des essais. En fait, l'équipe des experts qui a mené cette mission était composée d'experts venant de plusieurs pays. Et tenez-vous bien, il y avait dans cette équipe un expert français, un expert de la Nouvelle-Zélande, de la Slovénie, des États-Unis, de l'AIEA elle-même. Et l'équipe a été soutenue par un groupe de 7 experts venant du commissariat algérien pour l'énergie atomique. J'ouvre une petite parenthèse avant de revenir tout à l'heure sur ça. J'ai eu la curiosité d'aller faire des recherches sur les membres de l'équipe qui a mené la mission et j'étais très surprise de découvrir que l'expert français occupe depuis 2002 le poste de directeur de centre de Val-Duc en Côte d'Or, dont la mission principale est la conception technologique et la fabrication des composantes nucléaires des armes, de la force de dissuasion et les activités de recherche associées. Je ferme les parenthèses, mais je vais en revenir tout à l'heure. Malheureusement, j'ai préparé une présentation PowerPoint, je vais vous l'envoyer tout à l'heure peut-être, mais il y a dans le rapport des images de l'équipe, etc., et de toutes les mesures qu'ils ont prises, que l'équipe a, a pris pour sa mission. En fait, la mission s'est déroulée euh, sur 8 jours dans les sites des essais aériens et souterrains. Euh, et les doses radioactives ont été surveillées et des échantillons de milieux environnementaux tels que le sable fondu, la lave solidifiée, la végétation, l'eau des puits, etc. Plusieurs analyses ont été collectées et analysées après dans les laboratoires de l'AIEA en Autriche. Ici aussi, j'ouvre une autre parenthèse parce que dans le rapport, à l'introduction, on lit, et je vous cite ce passage du rapport, je cite, la mission a pu réaliser plus que prévu en raison des informations détaillées fournies par la France. Ces informations étaient essentielles pour comprendre les types et le degré de contamination. Je ferme les parenthèses, mais on va y revenir tout à l'heure également. Euh, euh, les conclusions générales de la mission étaient les suivantes. Je vais vous lire rapidement les conclusions essentielles de rapport et je vais tout à l'heure revenir sur elles une à une. La première conclusion est la suivante. La plupart des zones des sites d'essai ont peu de résidus radioactifs, à l'exception des localités de point zéro, à savoir Gerboise blanche, Zerboise bleue, et il y a ce qu'on appelle le tunnel E2, c'est l'endroit où il y avait, Patrice Bouvry a évoqué cela tout à l'heure, l'incident de l'échappement de matière radioactive du site des essais souterrains. On appelle ça le tunnel E2 et ce tunnel a été recouvert par une clôture pour éloigner les populations locales. Et donc, selon le rapport de 2005 de l'AIEA, la plupart des zones, il y avait très peu de résidus radioactifs. La deuxième conclusion, c'est que des mesures de taux de dose externe ont été effectuées et selon le rapport, 76 endroits et un total de 25 échantillons environnementaux ont été collectés. Bien que le nombre des mesures de taux de dose ait été considéré comme adéquat, le nombre d'échantillons collectés et analysés était quelque peu faible compte tenu de l'étendue de la zone. La troisième conclusion du rapport de l'AIEA est en fait, selon les scénarios qu'ils considèrent généralement conservateurs, et sur la base des résultats des mesures de taux de dose et de l'analyse d'un nombre limité d'échantillons qui est au nombre de 25, il n'y a pas d'indication que pour aucun des sites, à l'exception bien évidemment Gerboise bleue, Gerboise blanche et tunnel E2, des expositions annuelles qui pourraient se produire en excès des valeurs limites internationales acceptées pour l'exposition de public. Mais le rapport se contredit lui-même parce qu'il revient tout à l'heure et il nous dit que compte tenu de l'état actuel de développement de la région et aucune intervention supplémentaire n'est nécessaire, mais euh, et j'aimerais bien vous lire ce passage du rapport parce qu'il nous dit que, voilà, une enquête radiologique plus détaillée et plus complète ne semble pas nécessaire pour aucun des sites s'il n'y a pas de développement social ou économique dans la région d'intérêt. Et là, en fait, dans l'ensemble, l'analyse fournie par la mission de l'Agence internationale de l'énergie atomique à la fin de 1999 semble approfondie et complète, mais plusieurs points méritent un examen critique. D'abord, la question de l'échantillonnage limité. En fait, bien que la mission ait réalisé des mesures de taux de dose externe à 76 endroits et a collecté 25 échantillons environnementaux, il est noté que le nombre d'échantillons collectés dans le rapport lui-même était considéré comme quelque peu faible au vu de l'étendue de la zone. Et cela soulève des inquiétudes quant à la représentativité des résultats. Une taille d'échantillon plus grande et plus diversifiée aurait pu fournir une compréhension plus précise de la situation radiologique. Le deuxième commentaire et la deuxième critique de ce rapport en particulier, c'est la dépendance à l'égard des informations fournies. En fait, le succès de la mission était attribué aux informations détaillées fournies par la France. Aux informations détaillées fournies par la France. Bien que ces informations aient été cruciales pour comprendre la contamination, et ça c'est logique, cela soulève des questions sur l'indépendance de l'enquête et dépendre fortement d'informations fournies par une partie impliquée pourrait potentiellement biaiser les conclusions ou limiter la portée de l'enquête. Et je vous rappelle l'expert français qui est maintenant occupe un poste dans l'industrie militaire nucléaire. Et je m'en passe. Il me reste, je pense, trois autres critiques de ce rapport en particulier. C'est d'abord l'évaluation de la contamination. La mission a conclu que la plupart des zones et des sites de test avaient peu de résidus radioactifs, à l'exception d'endroits comme les localités de Point zéro. Mais l'évaluation repose sur des scénarios dits généralement conservateurs. Et il convient ici d'examiner de manière critique dans quelle mesure ces scénarios représentent fidèlement les risques potentiels d'exposition. Et d'où ça nous mène vers la nécessité de l'intervention. Et la mission a déterminé que le taux d'exposition à l'époque, à la fin des années 99, ne justifiait pas l'intervention, compte tenu, je rappelle, de l'état de développement de la région. Et elle suggère que les conditions économiques pourraient modifier cette évaluation. Cela soulève des préoccupations éthiques et de justice sociale, car des décisions d'intervention devraient privilégier la santé publique et la sécurité par rapport aux considérations économiques. Et finalement, et ma dernière critique pour ce rapport, c'est la considération des populations autochtones. Et rappelez-vous ce que je viens de vous lire au début de ma communication par rapport à ce dernier rapport du comité scientifique du traité sur l'interdiction des armes nucléaires. Ce rapport de 2005 de l'AIUA est vraiment scandaleux parce que la mission souligne la nécessité d'une estimation plus précise de doses pour des populations migrantes et nomades du désert algérien, alors qu'il n'est pas clair dans quelle mesure leur mode de vie, habitudes et méthodes de collecte alimentaire ont été prises en compte dans l'évaluation. Assurer l'inclusion et la protection des populations vulnérables devrait être une priorité dans de telles enquêtes. En fait, pour conclure, bien que la mission de l'AIEA en Algérie ait fourni des informations précieuses sur la situation radiologique des sites de test, il existe des domaines où l'analyse pourrait être plus solide, notamment en termes d'échantillonnage, d'indépendance des sources d'information et de prise en compte des populations vulnérables. Un suivi et une évaluation continue peuvent être nécessaires pour garantir la sécurité et le bien-être continu des communautés affectées. Et je vais vous mettre en lien le lien du rapport dont je vous parle. Merci infiniment.
Merci Amel, merci pour cette intervention minutieuse et pour cette critique vraiment intéressante. Donc, I'm switching back to English. Thank you, Ahmed, once again. So, unfortunately, Mr. Mahmoudi is not going to be able to join us today because of internet problem at the region he's staying at. Hopefully next time he will be among us to share his personal testimony. I have a question for the panelists. Any one of you can answer, or all of you. So after delving in this, what we know already, the long-term of environmental and health impacts on nuclear tests that affects communities, not only in Algeria, but in other communities. What kind of measures do you recommend to mitigate these effects? And also, what kind of strategy do you all believe are most effective in mobilizing international support for the abolition of nuclear tests of nuclear weapons and aiding the victims of nuclear tests? Anyone of the panelists can answer this, and then I'll take questions from the participants. If one of the panelists would like to answer, they can just turn on their microphones and go ahead and add. Dr. Marcus.
Thank you, Iman, and thank you for the question. I'd be happy to share some thoughts about it.
Yes, we can hear you.
So a first point in dealing with the legacy of nuclear weapons testing and enduring contamination is certainly cleanup, remediation. So the contamination that affects the environment and that affects the people in the environment. There is a need for a concerted and systematic program that will study and monitor the extent of this contamination and then apply tools for environmental remediation. An important element of this is certainly access to information. That is where governments may cooperate with one another to identify the locations where hazardous wastes may have been dumped or stored in order to ensure that these wastes are not posing a risk to the people and the environment. So in addition to cleanup and to information, it is essential that the victims received effective remedies. This calls for cooperation at various levels. It is well known that in many countries, territories inhabited by indigenous peoples and local communities were used for detonations for the nuclear programs of the big powers of the world. So this calls for cooperation north and south between the states that carried the detonations and the states where the detonations were carried out in order to address this legacy. And the last point is on Remembrance Day that is coming up, an opportunity to honor the memory of the victims and to educate future generations so that the scourge of nuclear weapons use and testing does not recur. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Marcus. I think you were listening in with the English at the same time.
I was listening to the Arabic
Interpreted.
translation. Yeah, so I
Okay.
was giving it some time to.
Yes, you can, when we're speaking in English, you can switch back to the original audio. That way you wouldn't be bothered with the other languages. Thank you for this answer. Yes, that makes sense, cooperation, especially between government. But I would like to go back to something you said earlier about when it comes to people who are radioactive environments are nearly impossible to clean up completely, and relocation for people who are affected with radioactive and affected by these nuclear radioactivity wouldn't be a good idea to relocate them. Also, earlier, Jean-Marie spoke about the international fund, the possibility of creating an international fund that was spoke of, and if that would be very helpful in this situation. So I'm a little bit confused with these points, and if you can add to that, or if someone else can. Thank you.
So I'll take the question that you just posed about the situation of irreversible contamination or extreme contamination that renders a location uninhabitable. In such a situation, I would argue that protecting the human rights of the people is paramount, and thus relocation is quite important. That relocation if at all possible, should be temporal, and there should be a right to return once the conditions that rendered the land uninhabitable have been remediated. And so that puts the emphasis on environmental remediation. The fact that there has been contamination does not mean that there's no responsibility for environmental remediation of the states that have been involved in the testing of nuclear weapons. In addition to that, international human rights law has elaborated a set of guidelines and standards to respect the rights of persons that are displaced and need to move from their lands. These guidelines are intended and standards are intended to ensure respect for the full range of human rights, ranging from cultural rights to issues concerning gender and differentiated impacts, among other rights. And so any resettlement program should be carried out in full observance of international human rights standards on that matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marcus, for your answers. They were, yes, enough for me to understand better. Jean-Marie, you can speak. You have the floor. You just unmute yourself. Jean-Marie? Jean-Marie, if you can hear me, you have the floor. I see you raise your hand. You wanted to answer. Okay, I think he's... Okay, I'll give the word to Dr. Mhenni if they'd like to ask a question.
Yes, I have two questions. First of all, I would like to thank you for this opportunity. And I have two questions. The first one, I would like to know who gave, from the Algerian side, the right to France to conduct the nuclear tests after the independence of Algeria. It means July 5th, 1962. Mm-hmm. Because France would not conduct the nuclear test without the approval of the Algerian authorities. This I would like to know who signed this, because this person, by signing and giving these rights, translate the way that he transformed the Sahara in nuclear waste. And this is creating the damage. The second question is, as you know, no assessment on the health of the region where the nuclear tests were conducted. There is no assessment, health assessment. And for example, no protocol was given to the doctors living nearby, or at least to give in a simple way to the population living in this area, especially because the doctors they did not have enough experience between the radiation and the health. I worked as a researcher in the University of Geneva Medical School, and in this university we got the training, but the doctors in Algeria, they never had a training, and at least to see how they can detect the health problems linked to nuclear tests, for example, or nuclear usage of using the nuclear product. This is my second question. As you know, the radiation, they destroyed the DNA and specifically the genes. These genes when, for example, they are checkpoint for the cells that they are renewable very fast will be the first who will be damaged. Therefore, you will have a cancer, but you will have, for some deletions of the DNA, you will have some defects and you will see congenital abnormalities. But there is no protocol provided to the doctors living in this area or nearby to assess the population and to see whether there is a link, at least because they may think some, specifically for the people who are living in the Sahara, they think maybe it's God who gave them, for example, a child born without an eye or without limbs or without any member or any genetic defect. Thank you for the person that would reply to these questions.
Thank you.
I'm going to take the floor. Okay, and I'm going to speak in French. Juste, je voudrais revenir sur la question juste avant, petit problème technique, désolé. Un des moyens pour agir, un des moyens pour faire connaître ce sujet, c'est bien sûr l'information, c'est bien sûr l'obligation que la France doit de transférer les documents, les archives qui ont trait aux questions nucléaires militaires qui se sont déroulées en Algérie. Et donc, c'est vrai que l'État algérien doit faire plus pression, mais la communauté, la société civile française et algérienne doivent faire plus pression. Et à ce titre-là, je suis très heureux de voir qu'il y a eu cette déclaration commune qui a été réalisée avec vous, Shoah, et qui a été publiée sur votre site, et pour ICANN France de travailler pleinement avec l'Observatoire des armements. Mais donc, l'information est clé, et c'est aussi pour ça qu'avec l'Observatoire des armements, lorsqu'on a publié cette étude sur les déchets nucléaires enfouis dans le sable, on l'a publié en langue française, en langue anglaise, mais aussi en langue arabe, parce que c'est important aussi que les personnes qui vivent en Algérie et qui ne parlent pas toutes français, puisque la langue principale n'est pas le français, puissent comprendre l'information. Et c'est aussi pour cette raison-là qu'on a travaillé ces dernières années à ce que l'organisme en charge de mettre en place une indemnisation des potentielles victimes des essais nucléaires traduise un maximum de documents en langue arabe. Et on a obtenu ces traductions enfin en novembre 2023. Elles sont effectivement, comme Patrice l'a souligné, pas très facilement trouvables sur le site qui s'appelle le CIVEN, le Comité d'indemnisation des victimes des essais nucléaires. Mais en tout cas, maintenant, il y a un certain nombre de documents qui peuvent permettre à des populations qui lisent et qui comprennent l'arabe de pouvoir agir dans ce sens-là. Concernant la question du docteur Meheni, si j'ai bien pu l'entendre correctement, c'est poser la question de savoir qui avait donné l'autorisation finalement à la France de réaliser ces essais nucléaires après 1962 dans une Algérie indépendante. Eh bien, c'est une autorisation qui a été donnée à travers la négociation des accords d'Évian, puisque ça fait partie de l'article 4 de la déclaration de principe relative aux questions militaires des accords d'Évian, qui autorisait l'État français à rester sur les sites d'Inecker, en tout cas sur les sites d'essais nucléaires, jusqu'en 1967, sachant qu'elle restera aussi sur d'autres sites Colombéchard pour réaliser des tests de fusées, puis en plus des tests liés à des questions sur les armes bactériologiques jusqu'au début des années 80. Donc l'État algérien a accepté, sans aucun doute, l'État français lui a forcé la main à accepter ces actions-là, mais ça faisait partie de cet accord et sans doute de la possibilité pour l'État algérien d'être indépendant dès 1962. D'ailleurs, c'est une particularité, c'est qu'on a un État, l'Algérie, qui a à la fois été une colonie où la France a réalisé des essais nucléaires et à la fois été un État indépendant et qui a eu des essais nucléaires de la part d'un autre État. C'est le seul cas sur la planète.
Merci, merci Jean-Marie. Monsieur Patrice, vous voulez ajouter quelque chose?
Non, je crois que là, Jean-Marie a à peu près expliqué dans quel cadre on l'a eu. Sur le plan, si peut-être un petit point quand même sur le plan médical, parce que c'était aussi une partie de la question, pareil, si j'ai bien tout compris, qui était posée. C'est vrai que la radioactivité, une des difficultés qu'on rencontre avec la radioactivité, c'est que ces effets agissent sur n'importe quelle partie du corps. Ça ne crée pas une maladie spécifique qui permettrait de faire facilement une identification, d'avoir la preuve que si on a telle maladie, c'est lié à la radioactivité, c'est lié aux essais nucléaires. Ça peut toucher n'importe quelle partie du corps et du coup, ça demande des analyses extrêmement poussées, donc extrêmement chères, pour aller voir au niveau de l'ADN, etc., pour voir, pour pouvoir identifier effectivement que tel cancer qu'on a, que telle maladie, telle malformation que peuvent avoir aussi des enfants, sont liées à l'exposition aux essais, mais pas à autre chose. Et ça, c'est vraiment une particularité qui permet aux États et notamment nous, à l'État français, de se défausser très rapidement sur oh mais c'est parce que nous par exemple pour le personnel qui travaillait aux essais donc soit des appelés soit des scientifiques soit des militaires on leur disait mais si vous avez attrapé tel cancer c'est parce que vous buviez ou c'est parce que vous fumiez ça peut pas être à cause des essais nucléaires et donc c'est une des difficultés qu'on rencontre. Et bien sûr, il aurait fallu qu'il y ait un point zéro de la population, de l'état de santé de la population qui soit fait avant que démarrent les essais, ce qui n'a pas été fait ni en Algérie, ni en Polynésie, bien évidemment.
Mais moi, j'aimerais juste rajouter, si vous permettez, une chose, c'est que est-ce que les
Brièvement, s'il
autorités
vous plaît.
algériennes, est-ce qu'ils étaient au courant que, comme quoi, des tests nucléaires étaient conduits?
Oui, oui, les autorités algériennes ont été au courant qu'il y avait des essais nucléaires. Alors, ils avaient probablement, voire même certainement pas tous les détails, mais ça faisait partie des négociations. Donc, ils ont été au courant qu'il y a eu et qu'il y allait y avoir des essais nucléaires. Encore une fois, la question est, ils ont été forcés à poursuivre ça. Mais maintenant, je dirais ce qui serait important, c'est que l'État algérien agisse directement parce que s'il est en droit d'attendre un certain nombre de documents, d'archives pour l'aider à enlever les déchets, l'État algérien peut par lui-même aussi agir directement sans attendre ces documents français, déjà en ratifiant le TIAN et d'autre part, par exemple, en établissant des bilans sanitaires des populations du sud algérien.
Et on pourrait même rajouter, ça devrait être l'objet de l'Agence nationale de réhabilitation des sites d'essais nucléaires français qui ont été mis en place par le gouvernement algérien il y a maintenant 3 ans, je crois, voilà, et qui a été mise en place et sur lequel on a à notre connaissance, mais nous, effectivement, on est basé en France, eu aucun compte-rendu d'activité qu'elle aurait pu avoir lieu. C'était une excellente initiative de la part du gouvernement algérien de mettre en place cette agence. Et à partir de cette agence, il a l'outil qui pourrait lui permettre à la fois de faire ce travail d'analyse, d'examen, etc., à la fois au niveau environnemental, sanitaire, et pouvoir faire des recommandations ou des demandes précises à la France aussi, et que nous, société civile, on pourrait appuyer pour qu'il y ait des choses qui soient mises en place en termes de réhabilitation et de prise en charge des populations.
D'accord. Merci. Amel vient de nous rejoindre. Si tu veux, Amel, ajouter quelque chose.
D'accord, merci Imen. Je m'excuse, mon téléphone, mon ordinateur a redémarré au mauvais moment.
Ça
Mais
n'est
bon,
pas
c'est les
grave.
problèmes techniques. En fait, on est toujours par rapport à tes questions, par rapport à what measures and what are strategies to help victims of nuclear weapons, right? Nuclear
You
testing.
can, yes, you can answer that.
Okay,
Yes.
so probably you all know that I'm a big fan of the TPNW, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And I believe that this treaty is a great tool in the hands of states to help the victims and to support their efforts in reestablishing the environment of the sites of nuclear testing. And I would, if I was at a policy making decision, I would probably ratify the TPNW as soon as possible, because it offers, as Jean-Marie explained previously, an opportunity to be in a group where there is the people, they come together and they put money and they create this fund for victim assistance that can be helpful for the Algerian government in matter of environmental remediation or victims assistance. So TPNW will be first. Second will be some independent commissions or missions on these test areas in the Sahara. And I would like to highlight this initiative, which is a South African initiative. It's called the Verification Hub. It's a group established by scientists in South Africa to promote capacity building of experts and scientists in Africa to be independent in terms of verification and scientific treatment of nuclear tests, etc. Yeah, there are lots of strategies and measures that we can take as well: education and outreach, verification and transparency, civil society engagement is very important. And I would love to hear Mr. Mahmoudi talk today, because I think that people who come to the review conferences of the TPNW, they have seen how important and how powerful the voices of the victims of nuclear weapon testing, the people they come from the Marshall Islands or from the French Polynesia, when they speak, they are very impactful. And I always hope to see someone coming from Algeria. So it will be very important to encourage victims to take the floor in international conferences and speak, because it is very important. And I don't forget the Hibakushas and the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yeah.
Thank you, Amel. Thank you so much. Always very pertinent. Dr. Marcus, would you like to add something as a final word?
Thank you. Well, it has been a very comprehensive conversation. I would wish to echo the points that I just heard as a final reflection. I wish to echo the point of how reality is seen from the victim's perspectives. That is the invitation and the challenge that human rights law and policy poses on us. That is where issues of assistance come into play, including medical assistance. And certainly for people that become ill, that medical assistance is very important. But I would say that it goes much beyond impairments or infringements of the right to health and even the right to life, because where whole peoples are concerned, where the historical memory, the lived experience of a community is at question, that goes to the issues of formation of identity and culture. And that is where access to information on the existing risks is not just a historical issue, but it's a live issue. That is where issues of reparations, of memory, of transitional justice, they all become relevant in the shaping of that history that is lived through generations and that informs how people see one another. The final point I wish to make is that while some of these tests may have occurred decades ago, the legacy lives on and their implications live on, and it is our responsibility as the current and present generations to deal with that legacy. And that involves the setting out responsibilities where they need to be set, whether it's the states where and the territories where weapons were detonated, or whether it's also the states that detonated these weapons and that have responsibilities in respect of remediation and reparations, compensation, and other issues, including the release of information where they haven't released it. So there's still an unfinished agenda. There's still a lot of opposition by certain nuclear states. But again, seeing the reality from the perspective of victims speaks to how this unfinished agenda needs to be tackled as a matter of urgency. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again, Dr. Marcus. I'm going to give the last word to Mr. Rashid. Rashid, go ahead. The floor is yours.
إيمان، أنا بدوري أود أن أشكر كل المتكلمين وكل الحضور اللي لبوا دعوة المشاركة اليوم في هذه الفعالية إحياء للذكرى 64 لأول تجربة نووية فرنسية في الجزائر. اليوم بعد كل سماع كل المتحدثين، في اعتقادي أن الجميع يتفق على ربما تكثيف سبل التعاون من أجل رفع مستوى الوعي، وكذلك من أجل المناصرة وللتقدم بهذا الملف ولو بالجزء ولو بالقسط الضئيل في هذا الوقت. نحن في منظمة شعاع طبعا من بين التحديات اللي رانا نعيشوها في الوضع الحقوقي بشكل عام في الجزائر هو عدم وجود انفتاح ربما حقيقي حول لإعطاء الفرصة للمجتمع المدني حتى يكون له دور في كل المجالات بما فيها مجال البيئة ومجال حقوق الإنسان والمجال القانوني وغيره. للأسف الشديد في فرنسا كان رغم أنه ربما مازال هناك تستر على ربما كثير من أسرار هذه القضية، وخاصة فيما يخص خرائط ومواقع النفايات النووية. لكن في الجزائر للأسف الشديد أنه مجتمع مدني ربما لا تعطى له الفرصة حتى كي يكون ربما مساهم في هذه القضية، لأنه في اعتقادي أنه بشكل عام أنه كما قال زميلي في ايكان فرانس أنه قال أنه يجب على الشعبين الجزائري والفرنسي والمجتمع المدني بشكل خاص أنه يتجند حتى تكون له لمسة أو ربما تكون له طريقة حتى يدفع للأمام بهذه القضية. وللأسف الشديد ربما حتى مستوى الوعي عندنا في الجزائر أنه للأسف الشديد اليوم عندما نرى أو نقرأ الصحف الجزائرية فقط بقي الموضوع في إطار ربما الاعتذار عن الجرائم فرنسا في العهد الاستعماري وفقط. لكن الشيء الأخطر الذي من المفروض أنه يتم فيه توعية هو أنه استمرار ربما الأضرار الناجمة عن هذه الإشعاعات، لأنه في اعتقادي احنا في شعاع ومع كل والشيء الذي نتقاسمه مع شركائنا أنه الهدف الآني هو توقيف هذه الأضرار المستمرة أو هذه الإشعاعات النووية التي ما زال لها أثر خطير على الإنسان وعلى البيئة وعلى حتى الحيوان. مرة أخرى أشكر جميع كل الحاضرين، وأتمنى أن تكون لنا فرص أخرى ومبادرات أخرى هكذا نقاش، وأن نعمل وأن نحاول أن يكون لنا تصور مشترك حول الدفع بهذه القضية وتسليط الضوء عليها. وكما لا أنسى أنه احنا دائما فيما يخص هذا الموضوع نشجع خاصة الجزائر من أجل المضي نحو التصديق على معاهدة حظر الأسلحة النووية، لأنه الموضوع وكأنه بقي فقط مربوط بالطرف الآخر فرنسا التي قامت بهذا الإجراء. لكن في اعتقادي أنه معاهدة حظر الأسلحة النووية الجزائر لها فرصة، والمتضررين في الجزائر عندهم فرصة كبيرة وآمال ربما تعلق على هذه المعاهدة حتى يتسنى لهم الاهتمام وتنظيف المناطق التي تم فيها هذه التجارب. شكرا جزيلا وفرصة أخرى إن شاء الله.
Thank you, Rashid, for your comprehensive intervention here. So as we draw our webinar to a close, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude for all of you, esteemed speakers and participants, for engaging in such a meaningful conversation. I would like to apologize again for the disturbance that happened at the beginning of this webinar. We've talked about historical depth, the environmental and health ramification, the legal landscape, and some possible strategies for to remedy the long-lasting effects of nuclear testing. I think the key here from all of what has been said is cooperation. We need more cooperation between government bodies and international and even local organizations to work better towards cleaning the environment and remedying the long effects of all of these toxic testings. So we also would like an open the call for Algeria and the rest of the countries to ratify the TPNW, and that will lead us fast forward towards healing, justice, and a safer future for all of us. Thank you again for joining us today, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you very much. Cheers.
Thank you.